Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have enjoyed the lunch and had a chance to network with the other participants. Our first speaker is Mr. Colin Charles, Chief Evangelist of MariaDB. He will have a presentation about Meet MariaDB, the new MySQL. Mr. Charles, please.
Thank you. So I'm guessing a lot of you probably have used MySQL before. Show of hands. Okay. Since this is the Internet Summit, a lot of you probably realize that databases are pretty important when it comes to building infrastructure or even applications. So I'm here to tell you a little bit about MariaDB, which is something we started about 5 years ago. I've been in the MySQL world for more than a decade. Since MySQL is now 20 years old, I've been there for about 12 years. I took this slide basically out of Alexa, which tells you the global top 20 websites. And I think it's kind of interesting in the sense that at least a few from the top 6 even don't run standard MySQL. So Google, YouTube, and Wikipedia today run MariaDB. Facebook runs a branch of MySQL with over 350 patches, which they publish on GitHub. The folk at Twitter run WebScale SQL as a base. So large companies tend not to run standard MySQL that you get from dev.mysql.com. So what is MariaDB Server? It is a GPL v2 branch. There is no enterprise edition, so to speak. It has a lot of community development, and the version 10.1 includes features and contributions from people like Google, Facebook, IBM, and so forth. It has a whole bunch of features, so we really are a feature-enhanced drop-in version of MySQL. The aim is to always be application compatible. We have over, at last count, 2 million lines of extra code that does not exist in MySQL. More code does not mean better software, but it generally means more features. And we are really still a drop-in replacement to MySQL. We just celebrated our 5th birthday on February 1st, so we have made over 88 releases, most of which are GA releases since we started. And for a relatively small team, we managed to ship a whole bunch of servers, where 5.5 and 10.0 are most popular releases of servers. 5.5 ships as a default in Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7. 10.0 ships as a default in SUSE Enterprise Linux 12. And we've also started focusing on fully synchronous replication in the form of Galera cluster. Not content with that alone, we decided we'll also make LGPL client connectors so that if you happen to be embedding an application that needs to connect to MySQL or MariaDB, today you can actually use one of our connectors without ever having to go through the dual license or paying a fee to Oracle to actually have said embedded software work. So, anybody here heard of Amazon Aurora before? Okay, not many of you. Probably many more have heard of Amazon RDS, which is pretty standard. Amazon Aurora is what Amazon's betting on for the RDS next generation, and we're very pleased to say that our Java connector, as well as our ODBC connector, is certified to run on that platform. Why MariaDB? Like the internet, it is not owned by one party. MySQL was owned by MySQL, then Sun, then Oracle. Here we're very much like the Mozilla Foundation and Corporation. In the last 5 years, I can tell you that MySQL ecosystem development has been at its most vibrant, largely thanks to the fact that Oracle had acquired MySQL. Oracle's been putting in a lot of effort, but serve the companies that depend on MySQL. They're putting in lots of effort, and there are other companies like us that also put in lots of effort. Generally, we also ship a lot of additional tools and engines that come from the community, and we feel that that actually gives you a lot more choice in terms of how you're going to deploy things. So you don't only just use InnoDB as a default. Maybe you want to use TokuDB in where you're using lots of Flash and you need good insert speeds and you want to have 90% compression. We ship alternative engines like this. In fact, I'm also really happy to say that when it comes to contributors, people who can commit code to the main repository, they are more in the community. The ratio is something along the lines of 55% to 45% in the foundation and the corporation. So there are more community contributors out there today. Who's behind it? Many, including the original Monty. David Axmark has also been an advisor. We have, on the development team alone, probably in excess of 250 to 300 years of development experience on MySQL. I myself have been developing MySQL since 2003. And we really do have a lot more contributors now because we're starting to see teams form at companies like Twitter, where they have at least 6 in the engineering team for MySQL alone. Facebook, Google probably have 30 each on, because this is crucial infrastructure software for them. We also really like to focus on making enterprise features open. And when I say what enterprise features open, I'm talking about the features that MySQL at Oracle have basically said, look, we're going to make some of these features only for paid customers. And one that is a great example is a thread pool. MySQL is really famous for web apps because it's also really famous for making very cheap connections. You can open up connections really, really cheaply. But the model is also that it opens up 1 thread per connection, and that tends to have lots of mutex contentions if everything comes back in 1 second or sub-second returns. So we opened up a thread pool, which we allow you to use, that allows you to open up maybe, say, 200 threads that constantly get reused. And this is typically very useful for web-based applications, messaging applications, and so forth. So MySQL created a commercial version. We made an open source version. Pacona, another company, improved on that open source version, and everybody's benefited from it now. And I guess the other important thing for an open source project is to also have open content documentation. Many people don't think of documentation as being particularly important, but for any level of success, you better have good documentation. And we have actually got everything under GNU GFDL as well as Creative Commons. Not content with just building the server, because many people tend to say, we like to shard, we want automatic sharding, or we want to route queries. We also have decided to develop a GPL thing called MariaDB Maxscale, which is a level 7 proxy. Level 7 meaning it understands the MySQL protocol, but it's fully pluggable so that it can also have other protocols being understood at the proxy layer. So we're currently working on a MongoDB one as well, which will allow you to write not just to MariaDB or MySQL, but also to MongoDB. Today you can also prevent SQL injections via regular expression filtering. It's generally quite useful, and its most useful thing today is to actually load balance between Galera clusters. Because Galera cluster comes with full asynchronous replication, but it doesn't tell you how to load balance. Sometimes you use a connector to do load balancing. Sometimes you add HAProxy in the front, but HAProxy doesn't understand the MySQL protocol. Maxscale does. Also completely open. You can find MariaDB at mariadb.org. We've probably got over 200,000 downloads a month, and it's growing. It's also the default in many Linux distributions. So when you ask for MySQL, you happen to get MariaDB for free without knowing. And Debian and Ubuntu ship it as a choice. Who uses MariaDB? Google was probably one of the largest public announcements. They migrated completely to MariaDB 10. They've also paid for features that they've wanted. They also participate in code reviews, QA, testing. And thanks to Edward Snowden, they also decided that it's time to encrypt everything, and they've contributed encryption code to MariaDB. Not only do they now encrypt your connections via HTTPS, all data that is stored in Google's data centers in MySQL is also fully encrypted on the tablespace level. And that code has now become open, and we're integrating it into MariaDB. So we will have encryption that even MySQL will not have. Wikipedia was actually our first largest migration, and they migrated for a variety of reasons, one of them being improved query times. And Wikipedia, in many developing nations, they actually offer this thing called Wikipedia Zero, in where Wikipedia is available for free for people to use on very slow internet connections that Wikipedia subsidizes. Now, if Wikipedia can load anywhere between 4 to 15% faster, the person on a 2G connection is going to be a lot happier. I don't know how many people here use KakaoTalk or have heard of KakaoTalk. Maybe WhatsApp is more popular. But KakaoTalk is pretty famous if you end up being in the Korean scene or if you like K-pop. And KakaoTalk has migrated completely to MariaDB. They backport features, and they also contribute features back into MariaDB. And for them, it was a case of messaging improved tremendously using MariaDB and Fusion.io. Today, we have a lot more innovation compared to what you'd find inside of just standard MySQL. We allow you to have things like multi-source replication that allows you to get multiple masters to write to a single slave. This could be for real-time analytics, complete backups, and so forth. We give you full GIS functionality. We do a whole bunch of things better. And that, I think, is key, because when you compare this to MySQL, we're easily 2 years, maybe even 3 years ahead in terms of features, availability, and then eventually MySQL catches up. What may be interesting is that last October, Gartner releases this magic quadrant thing, and it says that we were the first time entrants, and we were also the first time to make it into the innovators quadrant right at the top. Of course, we have lots of improvements to do, and we're nowhere near Oracle, which also includes MySQL and so forth. But the fact that MariaDB is there is kind of useful. This may be good for convincing your boss or manager that MariaDB is a database of choice. So, when it comes to Galera is kind of a different model because the traditional MySQL replication model is asynchronous. That means a master gets a commit, the slave may not get one. We've also included a semi-synchronous plugin since 5.5, which means at least one slave gets the commit. But Galera is fully synchronous, which means there's no master slaves anymore. Everything is either gets the commit or gets a reject. And we've included this, and we've improved it now when it comes to ensuring you don't lose transactions, and we don't also limit transaction sizes across the entire node. I think encryption is going to be a real hot feature for MariaDB, because not only do we encrypt either individual tables, we can also encrypt the full table spaces. We encrypt everything, including logs, and the binary log, which is what actually allows replication to happen, is also going to be encrypted in the next release, which is 10.1.5. Why didn't we have this at the start? Because Google didn't open source the code just yet. And the overhead is a lot less than 10%. And if this is running in production at Google, you can be assured that this is probably also okay for you to run. And it's pretty easy to get started. If you're doing table-based encryption, all you have to do is say page encryption equals 1. If you're doing table-space encryption, you can do that from the my.cnf. We also rapidly improved replication. Global transaction IDs mean that each and every transaction gets a unique identifier. It doesn't matter where in the replication topology it is at. That also means that when you want to switch from a failed master, it only now takes 2 lines of SQL. And we also have automatic binary log positions, which make it really easy for master failover and tools like MHA to be utilized. There are differences compared to 5.6 GTID, in the sense that GTID in 5.6 of MySQL does not support multi-source replication that we do. They also don't allow you to turn it on by default. You have to restart your entire topology, and the last I checked, that was impossible for anyone to do in production. You can't restart your masters and slaves to generate a global transaction ID in production. You can do this for a new application, but never a production application. We just append the GTID to the replication packet, so it's on by default. And also, size matters. We looked at and you can actually test this out. If you do an insert into T1 values, compare the two binary log sizes, we're at least a lot smaller compared to what you get in 5.6. We didn't make multi-source replication. Tball made multi-source replication. I'm guessing a lot of you here may use Tball even, right? Tball, Tball, the works. And they found that they wanted to use it for real-time analytic queries, and then they contributed the code upstream. So, thank you, Tball. But we've also found other people who want to use it for other things, like aggregation, complete backups, and so forth. And we've found that because Tball released this code, it's also started being used at Flipkart, which is probably the largest e-commerce site in India. It's also used at places like FunPlus Games and so forth. Performance matters to us. And this is one of the only few performance graphs that actually include, because we did not generate this, but Facebook's Mark Callahan generated this, so you can actually Google this and find it. Basically, instead of calling fsync at each and every transaction, we group the commit into one and thus improve performance when you have to turn on binary log syncing. We also have optimistic parallel replication in the sense that if you happen to send transactions in a parallel fashion, we can execute it on the slave in a parallel fashion. But now if you don't send them in a parallel fashion and we decide that you can benefit from it, we will actually turn it on by default for you, thus making your executions faster. If you happen to depend on things happening in a sequential fashion, we will also detect that. Another cool feature that we have, and this is really important for not only Galera, but also for provisioning new slaves, because with MySQL, you have to run something called flush tables with read lock. With us, you don't have to do that. You just have to do start transaction with consistent snapshot, and you can do a full MySQL dump, get a logical backup, which you can then provision a new slave with. This is a huge time-saving operation in large production instances. I already talked about the thread pool. I talked about how being open source has helped the thread pool become better. And I think this is why you should rely on open source software when it comes to building your infrastructure. And this is an example of how you'd benefit from having a thread pool as opposed to not having a thread pool as you start getting more TPS. We've, of course, improved a lot of InnoDB, and a lot of the work has to also be thanked to Oracle. They've done a lot of good work there as well. But we also decided that things that are important, like page compression, so we worked a lot with Fusion.io to basically double the lifespan of a Fusion.io device if you turn on InnoDB page compression. But page compression doesn't only benefit Fusion.io devices, it also benefits Flash, it also benefits SSDs. Of course, a lot of the changes we make to InnoDB today are not really benefiting spinning disk any longer, because we're finding that in the data center, people are not using spinning disk as often any longer. Also, instead of having to recreate tables to defragment InnoDB table spaces, we now have built-in defragmentation as well. We also allow you to have per query variables, so you can now, as a developer, set the max statement time you'd like a query to run. So in this example, 1,000 milliseconds, and the query will actually terminate, as opposed to actually going on forever. No more long-running query problems. We improved the optimizer tremendously, and that was one of the main reasons why MariaDB got famous. Easily, in 2012, we put in already 12 man-years worth of optimizer development into making the optimizer better. And if the optimizer is better, you should only see this in getting quicker return result sets. This is what prompted Drupal to say that they're going to move the entire testing infrastructure to run on MariaDB, because Drupal ends up making use of a lot of subqueries that tend to be inefficient inside of MySQL. This is an example of the fact that we can now spit out arguments in JSON, because JSON seems to be the new hotness, and we really like to include more JSON support inside of MariaDB. But we also thought passwords are important, so now we include a few password validation options. We now not only tell you can validate your passwords against, say, n number of characters, maybe it's alphanumeric and so forth, but if that password that you entered was actually not secure, basically if it could be cracked by cracklib, so if someone entered password 123, it would be rejected. Cracklib is standard with PAM libraries. You can just download it with standard Linux. Everyone probably has PAM on Linux anyway. Another cool thing we did for developers was to make sure that there's an SQL error logging plugin. Usually you have as a developer, you mask the SQL error. You just say error establishing a database connection to the end user. But you don't actually know why the end user saw that. If you could log all of this into a file or syslogd, you could come back as a DBA the next day and look at it and go, oh, okay. It turns out that at maybe between 11 to 12 o'clock at night, you need more capacity for your databases, for example. We've also thrown in an audit plugin, and now this is a commercial extension in MySQL Enterprise, but it's completely free from us. This is really important in financial institutions and other places that require audit logs, basically. Who connects to the server, what they run, what they touch. Again, either to a file or to syslogd, entirely up to you. We include interesting engines that allow you to parse JSON, write JSON, and also read and write BSON. And what is BSON? BSON is MongoDB's little JSON format. And this can happen either as an ETL operation, or this can happen live. It's up to you. Another cool little thing that I think helps a lot of people is that when you do an alter table, sometimes you realize, hey, it takes 5 minutes. Sometimes it takes 1 day. Craigslist, when they were doing alter tables, took something along the lines of 90 days. This is not a joke. They've been having data in MySQL since the mid-90s. So we now include something called progress reporting that allows you to know if you should go get a cup of coffee or should come back in a few months. If you happen to need to kill running queries of a running user, so you're a web hosting company, you can now kill all running queries of a user, you can kill their connections, you can kill by username. This is something that you don't get inside of MySQL. So we have all these little building blocks that make your life easier. We don't have materialized views inside of MySQL or MariaDB, but we give you the option of having virtual columns, things that similar to what you get inside of SQL Server and IBM DB2, which is a computer-generated column. And if you have persistent virtual columns, you can actually make use of this and basically say you have a materialized view now because you add it to a secondary index. If you feel like you need to stop mapping data because you need to make location-aware applications, one of the major problems with MySQL is that it didn't really support GIS functionality. We have full OpenGIS functionality for conforming to the OGC standards, the Open Geospatial Consortium. So today, if you ever feel like you need to not only just store latitudes and longitudes, but actually compute distances and shapes, as you would for any mapping application, you can use MariaDB today. And as a good example, you can actually import the entire OpenStreetMap dataset into MariaDB. It's only about 40 gigabytes in size. With that, I don't know if we have time for questions, do we?
Do you want to answer?
I'm actually open to questions if you have any questions.
Yeah. So I guess we can have 1 to 2.
Okay, we can have 1 or 2 questions. Yes, you had a question.
MariaDB is really interesting because it kind of fulfilled that promise of open source we'd heard so much, which is, if any other party ever takes open source project, you can always fork it and the community can start to do that. And it seems to be living proof of that. How is the relationship with Oracle? Is it antagonistic? Is it a good relationship?
So it really depends on who you ask our relationship with Oracle is. If you ask the technical people like me, we generally have a very good relationship with Oracle. They don't take our code, just like they don't take the WebScale SQL code. But we have actually made it very open. We in April at the conference, all the contributors to WebScale SQL, that includes us and Percona, and I'm guessing you come from Twitter, it says that. And a whole bunch of contributors basically said we'll allow Oracle to take our code, assuming they accept it under the Apache CDDL license and not this dual license agreement that they'd like us to sign, the OCA. They have not taken us up on that offer yet, so which is why we all have these forks. Oracle does not take our code directly. They implement features a few years later with different syntax, which makes us have to also have a similar syntax. So in the end, we support 2 types of syntax after several years. So the relationship is okay. I think it could be better if the lawyers were not involved. With the lawyers involved, it seems to be a lot harder. They also don't give you public roadmaps, and we do have public roadmaps. So when we say we're going to do X, we need to do X within the next year. They tend to say they want to do X, but may deliver in the next 2 to 3 years, which is around the release cycle. So I don't know if that fully answered your question, but I think our relationship is okay. It could be better. But Oracle's still been a relatively good steward, and nobody's really, complained. They've not shut MySQL down. In fact, they seem to be putting more resources behind it, and we benefit tremendously from the fact that they make improvements to InnoDB and so on.
Thank you for the question, and due to time constraint, I think we have to move on. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
I'll be
Mr.
at the corner, so you can ask your question.
Yeah, maybe you can approach him individually. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
you.
you, Mr. Charles.